This is return to work, so obviously we're going to be talking about Rule 240 and what I think is probably the most important element of Rule 240. There are a lot of rules we have to follow and hoops we have to jump through to make a sufficient 240 job offer. But I think the most important part of that is getting that ATP approval of that job. And we all have different experiences with that 240 job offer that we send, the job description that we send into the doctor. Sometimes we get them very quickly, sometimes they take a while, sometimes we don't hear at all. So we thought we would see if we could get these gentlemen up here to talk about what we can do to make that process better from their end and what they want to see from us, what's important to them, maybe what's not as important to them, and see if that can help us along in this process going forward. Obviously, one of the goals of workers' compensation is to restore injured workers to suitable light-duty work. And so in talking about this today, we're going to talk about the light-duty job descriptions and that process, and we're also going to take some time to talk about FCEs and their role in the process. So let me introduce the doctors we have up here today. Dr. Carrera with Peachtree Orthopedics specializes in hip, foot, and ankle. Dr. Kelly with Ortho Georgia specializes in spine surgery. Dr. Mangrum with Polaris Spine and Neurosurgery Center, specializing in sports medicine as well as physical medicine and rehabilitation. Dr. Mefford with the Physician Spine and Rehab Specialist, specializing in pain medicine as well as physical medicine and rehabilitation. And then Dr. Daftari in the middle with Resurgence Orthopedics, specializing in spine surgery. And before we start getting to the questions from them, Rodney had a few questions he was going to pose to the audience.
So I want to thank Dr. Mefford's group of physicians. They brought some of these nice Yetis with some gift cards attached. So what I thought we'd do is we'd ask a couple of questions to the audience. So if you know the answer, raise your hand. We'll give about 3 folks an attempt, and then whoever is closest to the answer will get the prize. All right, so first of all, what is the average? Okay, keep in mind there's more minor back surgeries like a microdiscectomy or laminectomy versus a fusion. So I'm talking about the more not as severe one, a microdiscectomy or a laminectomy. What is the average time that a patient is out of work? And I'm not talking about in the workers' comp industry, I'm talking about just in general, because as we all know, there may be a difference there. But just for a normal person that goes in, they get the back surgery, what period of time will the physicians typically expect them to be out of work before they can go back in? And again, it's not a heavy labor job. Let's say it's a claims adjuster. Hold on a time here. All right, let's call this gentleman back here. 4 to 6 weeks. All right, Yara, 6 weeks. Back in the back of the green. All right. All right, we don't have it yet in black. 12. Bruce. Bruce wins. It's really about 2 to 4 weeks, but that was the one that got the 2 to 4 in there. So, of course, with workers' comp, I think that y'all probably were slanted a little bit, thinking 2 years, 3 years. Just kidding. All right, so here's a tricky one. Of course, this one's coming from Dr. Mefford. I wasn't sure I was going to understand it, but I think I dumbed it down for me. If an injured worker is on opioids after an injury for more than 2 weeks, what is the average number of additional disability days that you can expect in your claim? Now, I want hands up, so let me repeat it one more time. So if you're on opioids after an injury for 2 weeks or more, what is the average number of additional disability days you can expect in your claim? All right, back here. 30? Okay. Back in this corner. 60? All right. Right here in the green. 2 weeks. Back in the corner. Excuse me. All right, right behind you. Yeah. A month. Pink. 45. We're getting close. We're all about. Dawn. Is that Dawn back there? No, right in front of Dawn. In the black. 0. Teresa. Yeah. How much? 2 months? That would be 60 days. Right here. 50? Boy, we're all around it. If anybody's like writing it down, they...
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
5 days. 7 weeks.
All right, who said 60 first? There was someone over. All right, you are the closest out of there. It's actually 70. Like, how close can you get? But you said 60 first, so we're going to give it to you. All right.
Thank you.
All right, we got one more. Let's see here. All right, how about this one? Out of every 100 workers, what percent is injured each year? It's not 100%. All right, Becky? Holly? No. Xander? No. In the black? 20? No. The green? Right over here? How much? 3? 3? Very good. In the blue or turquoise? All right, so you like.
That's the job.
It's 3.5%, so you're gonna have to get it. You were very close. Thanks, Dr. Buffett.
All right. Thanks, Rodney. All right, so we're going to get into the questions now of the doctor. So you've seen your patient, you've given them some light duty work restrictions. Those have been sent to the adjuster. The adjuster gets with their employer and maybe the defense attorney, and they send you back a job description. So, Dr. Carrera, I'm going to hit you with this first one here. When you get your job description, are you looking for more detail, less detail? Is there possibly a way to have too much detail in the job description?
I think they're generally detailed enough. So I don't think you need more detail than what they typically include. So I would say it's generally sufficient. I don't need any more detail than what's generally provided. I would say, the one-page description, 1 to 2 is plenty.
Does it change if it's a job maybe that you're not familiar with?
Absolutely. So understanding the nature of the job. So the descriptions that include what is the patient actually doing in terms of just overall responsibilities. And then secondly, the more specific it can be in terms of what those actual responsibilities are is real helpful in terms of trying to decide whether the patient's ready to take that on.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I would just say that patients will lie to you about what their job description is or what they're actually doing. For example, a flight attendant, for example, will say that they have to push 400 pounds in the beverage cart. Well, it's on wheels, right? I mean, a person can push a 3,500 pound car, it's on wheels. So they'll tell you things like, I have to push 400 pounds, or I have to be able to pull 400 pounds, there's no way it can work. So a detailed job description, or even better, if we can actually, as physicians, tour a facility. I enjoy touring facilities for that reason alone. And say, okay, here's, at Toyo Tire, here's a big, 70 pound, pallet that they have to push that has a bunch of rubber on it. Well, if it's on wheels, it's not 70 pounds to take to do that. So that's helpful.
I think that the question more that should be asked is the 240A enough, or should there always be a job description? Because what I find is that you get the 240A and it says sales, and you get the check boxes, which are difficult to interpret. or match, but then you don't get a specific sales job description. So I think the question better would be is that do you just want the 248 or do you want a variety of job descriptions that match that then you can choose from it? Okay.
So which do you prefer, ladder?
The latter.
Okay.
Yes. The 240 is very generic and very confusing and difficult to assess what the actual job is.
So if we're using a 240, you would like to at least have a written job description to go with it rather than just the numbers.
Right, because on top it says the position, it'll just say sales. But then, you know, it would be nice to have that specific 3 or 4 jobs that you're thinking of.
All right, well, so along these lines, Dr. Kelly, let me kick this one to you. Would it help then to have pictures or video of someone performing the job, and have you had instances where you've received that?
Yeah, so it is helpful, but sometimes you don't really understand, you know, and so, you know, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time reviewing all the, you know, film and stuff like that, but if you have, like, here's a picture actually shows what they're actually, you know, they're not twisting and turning, just going from here to here, you know, sort of showing some motions, because, you know, sometimes with spine surgery, if you don't want to do a bunch of bending, lifts that are twisting, or lift a lot of weight, then, you know, they may tell you, but, you know, I've had it come like feet away, you know, and then I toured it, you can see all the robots working, and said, you're just kind of standing there, you're not really, you know, pushing and shoving, you know, so I think it's helpful to actually see some of that, and see a picture, or, you know, it can help, you know, especially sometimes it's pretty clear cut, you know, so hey, he's going to return to this type of duties, and just, you can understand the reason, but sometimes in a factory, you may not quite always understand what the actual description is. So, you know, hey, this is the job site. This you can kind of see what this is. And so that can be helpful sometimes, depending on what the actual job is.
Okay. So along those lines, do you have a lot of employer insurers send you videotape? Dr. Ingram?
No, I very rarely get videotape. Occasionally I get surveillance video, but usually I don't get that much in the way of videos and photos.
How do you feel about reviewing surveillance video?
I feel like it can be helpful in certain situations. And, you know, again, it's, you know, I've had several cases, especially a recent one I can think of, that was very informative, and there was a big discrepancy between the behavior and the exam that was demonstrated in the office and then what they were doing in real life. So it certainly can be helpful in situations.
Are you?
My partner had one, but he got his video. It was from Private Eye, or I don't know who it was from, but the other guy had a surgery and couldn't get back to work. They had some surveillance where he was, you know, cranked on lawnmower, putting back in his truck, and doing all this stuff. So, you know, he did have that video, which he thought was helpful for him. But, you know, I've never seen it personally, but I've seen it.
As a lower extremity surgeon, I'd say the surveillance is oftentimes helpful because if they're exaggerating their complaints, they walk into the office, they're limiting, and then there's quite a bit of several minutes of surveillance video where they're walking normally. That really is a red flag.
Kevin?
Yeah.
I was just going to say that with technology these days, it's so easy for an employer to videotape a small snippet of a job or someone's job description and attach it to an email and send it so that we can get it to the doctor. And most of our communication with the doctor's offices are via email with their staff, so we can attach it to maybe a questionnaire asking if they can do the job. But I was wondering from the panel, have any of the patients come into you and said, well, this is really what my job is because they videoed it, because they take video and therefore just as well. Has anybody seen that? Don't give me ideas.
I haven't, but one thing on this topic, I think sometimes some of that too much information can be distracting. I think, you know, with this decision making as a physician, often we're trying to decide, you know, should they have a specific restriction and not get into issues of they tolerate the activity and these other issues that sometimes it can be a little distracting with the information or photos. You know, we think about spine surgery, there's specific limitations that are, you know, restrictions after a surgery. Not, you know, do they hurt when they do it? The issues of tolerance, I think, are separate. I think it's important to keep those things separate.
Well, and to echo what Dr. Mack was saying, one thing that as physicians, our job is not to find them a job or tell the employer what job they can do, but rather give them the right restrictions, and then it's up to the employer to do a job. And then, of course, you always hear the claimant comes in and says, well, they don't have light duty, so I can't go back to work, which is almost always a lie. But as a physician, you don't want to get too bogged down. And can they twist this widget? Can they pull that lever? Can they do this or that? Your job is to kind of give them more of a base restriction, and the job, the employer, is to find a job.
So I wanted to make a comment on the surveillance, and I don't know how it legally works, but I think that I have always found the surveillance helps. It helps you know the motivation of your patient. But what I find is when you get it, it's always 30 to 45 minutes, and a lot of the time is dead time where you're just watching someone's house. And in terms of time use, I don't know if it can be surveillance, but it's condensed, and I don't know if that can happen legally, where you're sort of like, okay, you could watch it in 5 to 10 minutes. That would be something that would be useful and time efficient. But to watch 45 minutes of someone's front door and then he walks out one time is difficult. And so, I think surveillance is not done enough. But if it could be done in those kind of snippets where here's walking, he was carrying groceries, he came out, in the times in terms of like, okay, he spent the whole day out with his kids, and that helps us know that, okay, the guy isn't just inside, but sort of a condensed version, but it does help.
I know in our practice we try to take sort of the highlights or the best clips and try to condense it into a couple of minutes if we can. Another option is if you're going to send the whole video, you can always point out to the doctors, go to 2:35 p.m., and that'll show you what we're concerned about.
Okay, so as far as the job descriptions themselves, any preference on having them before you meet with the claimant or after you meet with them?
Doesn't matter to me either way.
Before, because we just we decide their work status by form and in our note. We dictate the time and manner. So if we get it a week later, and we describe one thing, but then maybe they can do something else, and it doesn't help us. So having that ahead of time before the appointment, then it's not that you had to go back into an addendum. You dictated it correctly, you filled out your work link form correctly, and so it helps to have it before.
The reason why I say it doesn't matter to me because when I put it in the note, nobody ever reads it, and they ask me for it later anyway, so I have to get it.
So, Dr. Sorry, if you get the note before, is it something that you would typically discuss with the patient?
I have, yes, yeah. I've said that, hey, this looks like a reasonable job that you can do. This is what they've described, and if he says no, that's not really what it is, then sometimes they do. But I have often discussed it, saying, I think you can do this, and I think it helps them to know that you think you can do that. It's motivation.
Anybody not discuss it with patients if they have it beforehand?
That's why I send it afterwards. I really think that it's better to send it after the fact. One, you're meeting with the patient. You're not already looking at it like, oh, this guy's full of it. But you're getting an honest read on them. But sometimes I'll call your office beforehand and say, will you please ask the doctor to get very specific physical abilities of the patient? Ask them what they're able to do and talk a little bit about it. Like, why are they not able to go back to work? That lets the patient come in and either be honest and say, well, I'm doing pretty good. I'm able to lift this, that, and the other. Or if they come in and they say, all I do is lay at home on my bed because I can't really move, then I will send you the video, which can show a dramatic difference. And then you can say, this is a big difference between when he was in here and what I'm seeing. It also doesn't let them immediately try to engage and explain, and all of a sudden they're thinking right away, how do I get out of this? Oh yeah, I was hurting for 3 or 4 days after that video was taken. I mean, we all hear the excuses that come up, but what are your guys' thoughts on that? Anything?
I just had a case like that in the surveillance video, and the patient described, how uncomfortable their arm was when they got the pool with aquatic therapy. And the surveillance video, which I got, and I documented that in a note, and then after I got a surveillance video over at the pool with the kids swimming. And so it was, again, it was very specific, but it was fortuitous for one side at least that happened after I talked to people.
But most of the time, I get mine. It's going to be, I've already seen the patient, and the case manager is in there with them. They say, okay, well, we're talking about going back to work. They say go back to work, and that's when they kind of gave me the description. That one, so and I kind of looked through it, and you can kind of see it. So usually, most of the time, I don't really get it beforehand, but usually I get it in the room. The case manager's there, talking, hand it to it in. A lot of times I'll sit down, I'll review it, it seems like never we were all in together, but all talk about it.
You're talking about more the job description, right?
One job.
So what about a surveillance video?
Yeah, surveillance video, I guess that would be, probably either one of them. Before or after wouldn't matter to me. I'd probably want after go in there biased. I'd rather go in there up front and kind of talk to them first, and then see how things go. Then, like you
See if
said,
there's a dramatic contrast.
if there's a contrast, then we say, okay. Otherwise, video, they may tell me the same thing video shows. So I'd like to go in unbiased because I look at, I'm trying to look at my MRI before I see the patient. So I already have in mind what's going on with the genes. So I try to see them first and go plan, and then kind of go back and do the other stuff. So that way I'm not, I'm clear biased if I go in.
I'm still kind of sticking with I haven't seen it before. Because I don't think you know what to ask, right? Like in that other case, you could ask him, hey, if you've been in the pool lately, have gone swimming lately? And he says, oh, I can't go swimming. I mean, so it's difficult to know what to ask. In that other example, if you go out and go get groceries with your kids, you don't know to ask that because it's not a routine question that a physician would ask a patient during the normal course. And so if you see that video and you see what type of activities you've got recorded, you may allude to that or ask them that specific thing, not that you're trying to bust them or anything, but just sort of gauge. And when you say you want us to try to tell you what they can do, that's extremely difficult for us to know, like, okay, you can exactly bend 20 minutes of the day, you can go swimming, so there's so many activities that we don't kind of think about it. So I think I like to have it ahead of time because it'll help me ask the specifics that are related to what your questions are about.
But if you get it ahead of time, you're not sitting there discussing it with the patient.
No, I just ask general questions and
See, that's our fear is that we've had doctors that will sit and talk about it, which then there's this whole back and forth and debate about it. It really sort of waters down whether or not they're really being honest with you because they're seeing it, the doctor's seeing it at the same time. And there's this
No, I don't show it to you. It just helps you ask those type of questions.
Yeah, no, that's the way I handle depositions.
Yeah, I'd say I'd like to have the information ahead of time as well. And part of it is to not only related to activities, but then potentially challenging the patient with what they were doing in the video and contrasting that with what they're potentially doing for you in the office. So as an example, in the hip, if I have someone who is able to kneel down on that knee and get up in a surveillance video, and in the office they can't even squat down 10 degrees, then there's a clear discrepancy. So I'll try and mimic some of the actions that they're doing in the surveillance video that they apparently were able to do without a problem in the office.
So it sounds like the general consensus is you'd like to have it ahead of time, but it wouldn't necessarily be directly discussed, so the patient's not going to walk out of there knowing they've got some video on me. Which I think that addresses the concern that we've always talked about in the firms is that we don't want that out until it needs to be out. Next question I had is when you're in there with the patient and you're talking about, I was just interested to hear how your discussions go with patients about return to work, their ability to return to work, maybe when you expect a progression to full duty, MMI and things like that. Are those things routinely discussed with the patients that this is what I see for you in your future? Because it's very helpful for us to see that in the medical records, and some records have anticipated MMI date from day one. Now there's not always a date filled in there sometimes, but it does. Those kind of things really help us in terms of assessing the claims for the adjusters, and so I just wanted to open that up for discussion.
I try to put that on my notes, I try to do it up front when we're talking. So if we're talking about a microdiscectomy or a laminectomy or a fusion, neck back, depending on what we're talking about, I'll go ahead and talk to them up front and say this is what how long the surgery takes, this is your expected hospital stay, it's either outpatient or inpatient, this is how long we're going to be out of work completely, and then I'll see you back at that point, hopefully get you back in light duty. And I don't really go into the details of what that light duty is, I just say kind of you can light duty come back, and hopefully over that next 6 weeks or whatever the time frame is, and then hopefully full duty by that point. So I try to lay it out up front because it seems like then they've got the expectations in their mind ahead of time versus, we never really talked about it. Now that their first post-op visit, we say, okay, we're going to think about some light duty, and they're like, oh, I'm thought we had to work for 3 months or something. So I try to lay it out up front so they have a plan. Not that everybody's always going to fit in that same plan because sometimes things change or sometimes things come up that make it a little different. But I try to clear it up front so they understand it. And then at each visit, we talk about, okay, we're going to go here. If for some reason we can't, so okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, and I'll see you back in 2 weeks, and then we're going to reassess and talk about this again. So we put it in there.
I try to talk about it with each visit, and I think that it helps to frame expectations on the front end. There's a fair amount of research to show that physician personal beliefs about return to work has influence on the patient's return to work. So I try to stake that out on the front end, and I think that they're clear on my expectations from the get-go, and that hopefully has an influence with better. And I'll talk a little bit about how that's in their best interest, that it's not me trying to get them back to work for some other purpose, but it's in their best interest to get back to work.
I look at it as these recoveries from injuries or from surgeries take kind of an average time in terms of a range. So let's just say, for argument's sake, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get back from an injury on average. And if I'm seeing the patient at 4 weeks and it appears that they're behind, I will be more clear about what those expectations are, because I sense that they may be exaggerating and maybe not motivated. So I try and set those expectations more clearly if they seem to be on the slow end. So I agree with everything that's been said, but I think in the patients that are slower to meet expectations, I'm especially clear and deliberate about it.
I want to shift the discussion a little bit now to FCEs and ask, how often do you refer patients for FCEs? Is there something that typically prompts that in some cases and not others for you?
I would say when I use FCEs, mostly it's usually an FCE for me is when they've basically exhausted everything else, right? They've done the treatments, they've done the physical therapy, they've had the surgery, they've tried all the medications, and nothing seems to really be getting them back to where they are. And it's more of a situation that you just kind of want to see where they're at. But for me, it's more, okay, are they exaggerating their issues? Are they telling me they can't do as much as I think they can do? So you order an FCE for one of two reasons, just to get an answer, see what comes back. But also, if they punt the FCE, if they make it invalid, they invalidate it by not giving forth 100% effort. To me, that gives me a lot of information because I know what their motives are at that point. I know that they don't want to go back to work. What's the number one reason people don't they get injured? They don't like their jobs, right? And so they don't want to go back to their job, and then they prolong their symptoms that they're reporting to you. So an FCE will kind of give you an idea if they're punting or invalidating their own FCE for their own secondary gain. And that's kind of where I find FCEs to be the most helpful.
I use probably FCEs maybe 25% of the time. There's some great FCEs and there's some not so good FCEs, but I agree with the when they don't give the full effort that helps you. But a lot of the times the information that comes back isn't specific enough to the job that they're doing to be able to say that it matches it or not. And for the expense, maybe just because I've been so long, I kind of have a sense of what their activities are. And so if we say it's moderate to medium, it comes back moderate to medium, well, then we had already predicted that. But I think that if we had more specific return to work job descriptions and categories to pick from, that would probably be a better use of FCE. And then in that patient that says, "Oh no, I can't do that," then maybe you would order that to say, okay, you're not trying. But I think that would be probably better and more useful for me.
Is it a situation where when you have that patient that is seemingly, in your opinion, over-exaggerating their symptoms and maybe malingering, is that what prompts you to do an FCE? What is it that...
In that circumstance, yes, because that's really the, like you stated, if they're not even going to give a full effort, then that sort of goes to this
You get verification on that.
That's
but
the
if
only.
they're willing to go back to a light duty job and you have one, and they're like, yeah, I want to try it, then it doesn't make sense to order that FCE, right? Because they're going to go try that job that you're going to say that they're qualified for.
When they're malingering, the objective data you get from the FCE is that they didn't put forth good effort. Like if the MRIs are pretty normal, or the surgery went well and everything looks good, the objective data at that point is the fact that there is no objective data, right? And there's nothing worse than an FCE that comes back and it's invalidated by the claimant, and then the person says, "Well, I recommend sedentary to no work based on basically based on no objective data in the FCE." That's the worst. And there's some people who do FCEs in this community who say that when the person punts their own FCE, then they say, "Well, they can't work because I don't have objective data to restrict them. Therefore, they can't work." That to me is the opposite. If you don't have any objective data to restrict, you can work, right?
I have a question for the doctors. So when you have an invalid FCE, let's say it comes back invalid, so the best FCE provider can say is sedentary duty because that's all they can do. What do you do with the invalid results? In other words, what restrictions are we left with? Are we left with maybe they can go back to their normal job, or do you bump it up a level? But ultimately, it seems like that FCE that we were trying to get restrictions is now coming back to you to make that decision. So what would you do with it?
Now, I don't order FCEs very often because sometimes you get saddled with restrictions that you may not necessarily agree with. So I tend to order them mostly in these other situations where you suspect there's a disconnect between effort and what somebody's able to do. And in that case, if somebody comes back with an invalid FCE, I would tend to default to no restrictions or certainly to a higher level than not a restriction.
Good answer. Anyone else have a comment on that?
That's pretty. FCEs for me the same way. I already know kind of what my plan would be for patients, and if they're not allowing that for some reason, then I mean, look, this is what the normal course is where everybody does, and so all of a sudden you're not. So I'll use an FCE for those. Maybe if it came back invalid, then I'll go back to the plan was again. Go back to that.
We have Peggy Freeman sitting here in front of us who does FCEs, and so I have a question for her. Maybe she can address it. My view from a defense attorney on FCEs is there is a time when I want one, which is usually only when I have a patient that has been totally disabled and I can't get the doctor to give us any light duty release. You can't even file a 104, and it's been a long period of time. You know they can do some kind of work. So an FCE will give you some kind of light duty release, I feel. But what about the patient that you really do believe is probably getting to the point where they can go back to their normal job? I very rarely have seen FCEs that say, yeah, full duty, no restrictions, because they're measuring all these different factors. And let's face it, I shouldn't be lifting 200 pounds frequently. It's not because I'm injured, it's just because I'm not made that way. So I was going to ask Peggy, how do you obtain a full duty release from an FCE?
The best way to do that is when you have a good job description. And I don't know if people
You can
can
stand
hear
up
me.
again.
If you get a job description that says somebody operates a truck and loads and unloads, that doesn't give me enough information to say whether that person can go back regular duty. If you have in the job description that they have to load and unload and they're doing 20 pounds frequently overhead and 30 pounds from the floor, then I can tell you, yes, that person has reached that and they can go back to regular duty. And our FCE reports, we have a statement at the end that says that the functional capacity of what they demonstrated equals what they can do at work. And if we don't have a job description, we have to base it off of what the patient has told us that they have to do at work. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what the employer says happens and what the patient says happens. Sometimes it's in the middle. Sometimes the patient doesn't really know what they have to lift, and they might over-exaggerate or they might under. So having that accurate measurement of what something a person has to do in their work really helps us with a functional capacity evaluation. And I agree, if I get somebody that comes in and doesn't do well in their validity and giving their best effort, our recommendation at the end is return to work. Because to me, the game is over and you need to go back to work. If you're giving a good effort and you have restrictions, then yes, here are the restrictions and move forward with that. But if you're not, if you've got a lot of issues and secondary drains going on, then to me it needs to be returned to work. But having a good job description, and if you don't have a good job description, or if you work a lot with the company and they have a certain entry on a certain job, it would be prudent for y'all to go to the effort of having somebody go out there and quantify what has to happen in that job. So, you know, I too have been on a lot of job sites and measured a lot of jobs, and you know, you can go out and measure the force of what it requires to push the pedal on a truck, what's the force required to open and close the doors on a truck, and all of those different parameters, so that when somebody comes in for the evaluation, yes, they can do it or no, they can't. And if you're just a little bit off of what they need to be able to do to go back to regular duty, then maybe you put them in work conditioning for a few weeks and you get them back regular duty. So to me, having a good job description, and not just a generic that says they have to bend how often? They have to lift 50 pounds. Well, 50 pounds can either be medium or it can be heavy. If you're only doing it occasionally, you're in a medium physical command level. If you have to do it all the time, it's in a heavy. So having that knowledge for us as evaluators is important.
Thanks, Peggy.
We've covered the questions that we wanted to cover today, so we thought if we had some time, we would open it up to some questions.
I actually have a question for the doctors. So, in Georgia, an aggravation to a pre-existing condition is an injury, so we have to pay for it. Even if someone's got a bad back for years, we aggravate that, we have to pay for it. But we only have to pay for it until they're back to their pre-injury state of health. And I've got to think that when we send you letters or ask you the question, is someone back to their pre-injury state of health, that's probably got to be a very difficult question for you to answer. Mainly because you may have a patient who says, well, I was able to work before and I know I can't do the job now, or I'm still in pain, I wasn't having this pain before. So what are your thoughts on answering that question, and what can we provide to you that's going to help you, or maybe make it a little bit more of an objective response? And one comment is, or one thing I would suggest is, like, if you find a medical record in the past that says my pain's 5 out of 10 and now after treatment they're back to 5 out of 10, that seems like something you can compare and say, looks like they're back to the previous state of health.
Yeah, those are the tough ones. You know, it's easier when you got a disc herniation. You can see it, it's new. You got a fracture, you can see it. But sometimes you get aggravation of pre-existing arthritis. You know, it's difficult to have that conversation with the patient because they come in, they're hurting, and they're saying, no, I wasn't hurting, I'm hurting. And you look at your x-rays, look at your MRIs, and you say, there's not an acute injury here, right? I don't see something that happened. So, you know, sometimes when something happens, I'm hurting, and I was like, well, you aggravate some of the stuff that you had already. And so those are difficult conversations because they say, no, this is something's bad, something's happening. And so it's tough, but a lot of times I'll try to get them and say, all right, here's your MRI. Good news is, you know, I don't see anything that's fractured, that's broken, it's herniated, there's nothing that's new. This MRI probably looked the same yesterday as it did today, right before your injury. Do it before your injury, after it's quite the same MRI. And then I'm just going to say, look, you probably aggravated this. You could have done it at work, you could have done it at home, whichever way, but you know, this is our goal. We're going to try to get it reduced, we're going to try to do these things, and then, you know, just kind of reiterate to them that, you know, the good news is that we don't have to go in there and do a surgery. Maybe, right? Maybe you do. But it just depends where you are with it. But those are the tough ones because you got to sit there and, you know, try to explain to the patient that it's just aggravated. The good news is we're going to treat it. We're going to do some things to get back where it was, but we're not going to go in and change it and make it different. But hope we get you back where it was. I struggle with those words a lot because some things that they aggravated, but you know, and somebody's understand. It's all depends on the patient. If you got a great patient, they're going to understand that and you're treating them better. It's just the ones that, you know, maybe going for a while, it's something we've got to take care of for them. I think sometimes it's more difficult for those guys.
Dr. Doctor?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously that is the hardest case. You know, I can think of a patient that I had that's a forklift operator, and he's had several injuries, and he's been out, and every single time he can come back and drive a forklift. But, you know, whatever happened this time, whatever bump he went over this time, and now he's like, now, when I drive the forklift, you know, my hands go numb, and I can't feel the steering wheel. So it's, you know, but then if you look at all the MRIs, you know, are they dramatically different? No. So it's, unfortunately, in those cases, a judgment call. And, you know, as physicians, we're always trained, you know, to listen to our patients. Unfortunately, we're patient advocates. We're trained, all of our training, you know, listen and, you know, listen to the patient. So, you know, that's a perfect example of how do you judge that the aggravation is over. So, I mean, you look for things like that, like, you know, now you can't feel the steering wheel, now there's a weakness. If you can have access to his other records, but he had weakness before, now he doesn't have weakness, or he does now, and he didn't before. You know, you hope that there's clues, but when there's no clues, then that's the most difficult. But if there are clues like that, that there's a function issue, now he can't drive his hands good enough, it seems to me that may be a difference in this injury versus the other, even though they might have changed.
Sometimes things like the ODG guidelines can give you a point of reference for what would be a typical time frame for an aggravation. You know, I see, you know, somebody who has maybe facet arthritis or facet pain. So you have some normative data for things like the ODG guidelines that can sometimes guide that process as to what would be typical for a flare or an aggravation.
And to expand on that too is, you know, what's the next step if somebody has an injury and they're pre-existing and it kind of lingers on and you're going to want an IME from somebody else, right? That's what you're going to order to find out. Okay, are they continuing this treatment? Is it reasonably medically necessary? You know, is it reasonable treatment? Anything unreasonable or not medically necessary in the process? And so, as physicians, you know, like we're seeing, if you have, you know, MRI evidence before an injury of some sort of degenerative changes or a disc bulge or herniation, and then it's still kind of the same after the injury, when you do a follow-up MRI, everything kind of looks the same. Then you ask yourself the question: what's reasonably, you know, necessary? What's reasonable medical treatment at this point? If you've exhausted that, and they're back at their baseline pre-existing condition.
Dr. Carrera, we were talking actually before, and I was going to get your comment on this, that you treat hips, and a lot of the hip problems that you see are really arthritis based. So let's say, and we don't all have a perfect workforce out there. People probably should be doing some of the jobs that they are doing. They probably have pain, but they may not talk about it. But if you have someone, say, with you know, significant hip arthritis, but the employer doesn't know about it, they may not have gotten treatment for it. They have a fall, they have pain, and then all of a sudden you find some real problems in there. How do you get to that point where you can say, you know, we're back to a pre-injury state here, but what they may have restrictions right now, but it's not due to this injury. It's because they've got a bad hip and they've had it for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think in the setting of arthritis and just in general, I try to understand the condition well. So if you have more advanced, if you have severe arthritis, I think that's very different from having a hip injury that has no arthritis. And looking at an aggravation of pre-existing disease and the likelihood of returning back to a previous level. So I think the extended disease is important in trying to make an appropriate judgment call. You know, another example I would say is Achilles. So if a patient has an Achilles injury and we get an MRI, if there's severe degenerative changes with partial tearing, I think that's very different from someone who has a normal MRI. And so understanding the disease even after the injuries occurred, I think that really has to factor into the call that you make. But in some ways, we're not clairvoyant. We can't exactly know what was going on before and make a perfect call. So it is, I think, the most difficult part of managing this.
If a patient is being treated, if they have multiple MRI scans are completely normal, no degeneration, no disc herniation, no disc bulges, completely normal. The treatment goes through in
But if you see nothing and they've gone through everything, then I think you have to just tell them, you understand you have pain, but you don't see anything objective that you can really restrict them on. And you're sorry they have pain, but there's nothing fixable. It's something that rather than getting in with the patient, sometimes I'll use a word saying, there's nothing fixable that I can see here. And as an orthopedic surgeon, I'm sorry I can't fix it, but there is nothing you can fix. And rather than challenging them, saying, it's normal and kind of making it up kind of thing. Sometimes I'll use that, but I agree. I don't think that patient should get any more treatment.
As kind of a follow-up with that, is it then, if you're still complaining of pain, is it then an automatic referral to pain management because you can't find anything else to do?
So, no, it shouldn't be, but I guess. Sorry. No, I think that I use pain management when you're having difficulties with the medical management, or the medical management in addition to injection management. But I don't think that that I use it personally. That that 6 months just to get them out of the clinic.
I'll follow up on that as a pain physician. It's kind of the next step. We'll get them out of my office because I can't find anything wrong with them, send them to pain management. And that's where the black hole of pain medicine came from, right back, even just a few years ago. And you want a pain medicine physician on your panels that isn't a black hole. And so we actually get a lot of those patients. We get a lot of patients who come in, there's really nothing wrong with them, and they are the most confrontational patients you have. When somebody has diabetes or they have cancer and other things, they don't want to have these diseases. Nothing makes some of these work comp patients more angry than to tell them that there's nothing wrong with them. They want to have something wrong with them again. Maybe they don't like their job. So we have the conversation, I'm sorry, but there's nothing on MRI, on exam, on whatever that I can help you with. And then they say, what am I supposed to do? I can't, I have all this pain. And truthfully, I say, well, you consider things like yoga, and I'm not making this up. Yoga is very good for spine health. People, they laugh at you, but seriously, yoga is very good for spine health. Is it maybe because a lot of times people are just deconditioned. A lot of times people don't recognize that their muscle pain, which feels like bad spine pain, is just nothing but a weak, deconditioned muscle. And doing things like yoga, it's not impactful. It doesn't require a lot of exertion necessarily, unless you're doing the P90X version. They put a bunch of push-ups in the middle of it. But the point is that these things can be very helpful, but you can have a civilized conversation with them. You can offer them some sort of real-life treatment options, but you're not calling them a liar or somebody's making things up.
One thing I'm trying to help too, I say, look, the good thing about MRI is it shows everything. The bad thing about MRI is it shows everything, right? So I'm going to tell you, the good news is I don't see a disc herniation, I don't see a fracture, I don't see cancer, I don't see infection, I don't see all this stuff, so that's the good news. Bad news is it looks normal. I can't see where your pain's coming from. That's the bad news. So I try to use that and say and that works because you're not going to be paralyzed. You're not going to go out here and make your back worse. You're not going to go out here and it's not going to make it worse. The more you kind of get back doing things, the better this is going to be because, like, getting deconditioned, it takes a little time. So I always kind of use that a little bit in my favor to say, look, not as normal. I got nothing for you. It's like, hey, good news is you're not going to be paralyzed. You're not going to do anything. It's just going to be sore. It's going to be tough, but you keep pushing and things will get better. So.
I'll just comment on related to a couple of things. Related to hip injuries, I think that there are a number of cases that I see that haven't been worked up. They haven't necessarily gotten good MRIs or been examined well. So I would just step back and say, has there been real expertise maybe in the treatment and the management of the problem? And the foot and ankle, I think that happens a lot less. So the second part I would mention is the contribution of psychological problems, and this is true not only in work comp, but just in general. There's increasing evidence in orthopedics that anxiety and depression contribute to pain both before and after surgery. And so if I see a patient like that with or without workers' compensation, you have nothing on MRI that look totally normal. If they have a depression or anxiety history, or I'll just ask them, has this made you depressed? You can ask in roundabout ways. If they're, there's a chance of that, I think you need to go down that path.
To add to that, I agree with that statement, and I've gone to most all of my workers' comp patients. I do a screening test for depression, and there's strong indicators that it has influence not just on orthopedic issues, but outcomes for epidurals and spine surgery and return to work generally. So all of my injured workers get a screen for depression. And a lot of those folks, I think, one of the issues with pain medicine is that people tend to think you're going to go to pain medicine to get pills or shots for it. But I think that's a misunderstanding of the workers' comp process. And so we'll talk to people and say, I'm sorry you have pain. Your MRI suggests that you don't need restrictions, you can go back to work, but we don't have to say you don't have any reason to have pain. Just you don't need any restriction from work activities. And so that distinction, I think, is important in the context of a work-related injury. And if you're screening for depression, it gives you a reason to talk about some other things, that maybe you need to address these other things, and talk to cognitive behavioral therapy or some other options. But the screen, for me, sometimes gives an out with that or a way to address something.
We maybe have time for one more question. Anyone? All right, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for being a part of this. And I'm going to put up here on the screen the name of the doctor and the workers' comp contact in their office. So please write these down and make good use of them.